Welcome to the Built on Air podcast, season 11, episode 2. Good to be with you live this Tuesday morning. Got myself, Dan, and regular host, Camille. Welcome, Camille.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. Allie couldn't make it today, and we may get Jen Rudd, who was our guest, had to run out, deal with some sick children, and so maybe she'll join us later in the show. If not, she left us some material that we'll go through. So good to be with you every Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern. We do our live show. We walk through 4 different segments. I'll give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. We always go through the communities and see what people are talking about with Airtable. Then we'll do a spotlight on OnToAir, our primary sponsor. Then we're going to move things around, and Camille's first going to walk through and automate create with financial transactions and categorizing using automations. Then we will talk about some scripting time and go through how to interact with the metadata on fields within a script. And then we'll do a spotlight on BuiltOnAir, our community. And then finally, we'll go through the new timeline features. And if Jen isn't back by then Camille and I will go through that together. So with that, we'll start with our Around the Bases, what's going on in the Airtable community. This week, Airtable is on a pretty good velocity of releasing new features. Got a couple new updates that came out this week from Airtable. First one, not too big of a feature, but this might help some people. Ability to close form submissions. Mm-hmm. So instead of, sometimes you have like a form that's maybe for an event or something that's timely, and you don't want to delete it, but you don't want people filling it out because you're not accepting new submissions for whatever reason. So this must have been a use case that they got probably from an enterprise customer. This seems like a very specific need that one of their customers wanted them to incorporate. So yeah, I don't know if I'll be using this, but this might be useful to some people.
Yeah, I think the only time I've closed down a form, I removed all of the questions and then changed the description up at the top that said it's no longer accepting responses. Because otherwise, if you delete the form, you're sent to like this page doesn't exist, and that might not be the message you want to send to whoever's clicking on that link. So this seems like a nice way to not have to delete your fields in case, or hide your fields rather, if you ever needed to go back and see what that form view actually looked like. Because what if you want to reopen it at some point? This seems like a good way to be less permanent.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, especially if you're sharing the link out in the internet and you can't control where all the links are, then this is a better way than just having it being a dead link if you deleted the form. So that's useful if you're using the Airtable forms and need a way to not let people submit. And let's see what other.
There's in this thread, they're talking about it would be nice if we could say, like, set a timed window, like close this form after 30 days or something like that. That's some of the suggestions recommended in this thread.
Yeah. So yeah, some good commentary. Scott and Kavan, our regular listeners, are commenting on there. So that's one of the features. Let's do this one next. Next feature that they released, improvements to base sharing. So this is kind of more, they didn't really add any functionality. They just kind of made it easier to share your base. It's kind of confusing because you can share at the base level. You can also share at the view level, or you can even share at the workspace level. I don't think this impacts the workspace sharing. Don't believe so. but yeah, just kind of improvements on the UI interface for how you share and trying to make it a bit more intuitive, easier to use and understand and see. It is confusing, like knowing who's being shared at what level. And so hopefully this helps manage the sharing aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Scott loves being the first one commenting. He stays on top of these.
He's always ready.
Um, yeah, yeah, he's everywhere. Yeah, so I think that's kind of that. Nothing too big there. As far as new features, this one, I don't know. Did they make an announcement on this one, or somebody in our community posted this?
I don't recall an announcement.
Yeah, I don't think that this has been publicly announced, but they do have it in their articles. Um, and does this one require signing up for the beta?
Probably. I think,
Actually, I don't think it does. Let's find out.
well,
Let's,
I think that, well, the general gist of that update is you would be able to email data to um,
mm,
your Airtable base, and it appears to be locked for enterprise users.
yeah, looks like it's just for enterprise at this point. I think it might say that upgrade to sync from Tableau. That's a new one as well. I don't remember seeing a Tableau integration. So if you're an enterprise customer, you've got some new functionality. So this one, does it say enterprise only? It's in beta, currently only available to enterprise plan customers. All
So,
right, so this is enterprise. So that's probably why they haven't put out a public announcement on it.
mhm.
But basically, so eventually, I'm assuming, hopefully, this comes to pro users. But basically, what it does is you can have an email with an attachment, and it can be an Excel file or a CSV file that has data, and it will automatically import the data in that CSV file into the table, and it can either create new records or update if you have a field that will sync with your CSV. So that's kind of cool because there are systems, and they talk about this in the article. There are systems that allow you to export via a CSV email or something. And so you could set up an export from one system to automatically email into Airtable and have that data synced over via that CSV dump. Or if you just download a CSV, you could just email it in. You'll get a special email address that they'll give you when you set this up. And then anytime you email that with an attachment, it will get synced over that data. So you set up the mapping.
This sounds super nice, and I'm sure they'll develop it throughout their beta and if it ever gets officially released. The thing I'm going to be talking about later today involves me routinely syncing, not syncing, but adding in CSVs to my existing tables. And I always have to make adjustments about which field gets synced to what column from the CSV. The names never change. It's always like the same data. But I wonder if the implementation of this is going to sort of enforce, like, tell me exactly the name of the column that is coming from the CSV and exactly which field it gets imported to. Because if there's any variability in that, I would hope that it's not dumping incorrect data types into the wrong, place, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I believe you have to set up the mapping similar to like when you do a manual CSV import.
So you would maybe do it for the first
Yeah.
time, and then this every subsequent time it just sort of follows that same logic.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as long as there's that, because otherwise, you know, I'll talk about my my headaches later.
I know one thing that I read in here was that this doesn't work with the primary key has to be Actually, you can change it to a primary key, but it can't be a formula. So you can't use a formula as like the unique identifier that it uses to map with your CSV import.
One day, and I hope it's soon, I hope they deal with the limitations of having a formula as your primary field, because it is generally recommended for a lot of different tables. If you have more than 3 tables in your base, one of those tables should probably have a formula as the primary field. And I know Kavan's in the chat. She has a dislike for having auto numbers as your primary field for very
Yeah,
good reasons. They're
yeah,
they're not great, all things considered, but they have a similar problem. Anytime you have a calculated field of some sort as the primary, you run into issues like this one. And for automations, there's workarounds you have to do. I hope they resolve that. That's on my wish list.
yeah. All right. I think we're gonna get Jen back here soon, so that'll be good. Yeah, for sure. There's limitations with that, but at least they allow you to use a formula as your primary key in some instances. I know
Yeah.
other platforms that I use don't allow. You have to have a text. They actually only allow text. Notion is the one I'm thinking of that doesn't
Yeah.
do that.
With a lot of more traditional database type things, there is no field types beyond string and number. So it's one of the strengths of Airtable to have all these different field types. I just wish for some of the sections of their product, having a primary field that is a formula wasn't a detriment, because
Yep,
most of the time it's positive.
yep, for sure. So yeah, so a few things, nothing too groundbreaking on the feature releases, but they are pushing out new stuff. Some of it only available at enterprise. So we'll see what else is coming.
There's also another feature that I
Did I
will
miss one?
also demo in my, I don't know, walkthrough for automation sections, which is nice.
Oh, I did miss that one. Okay,
I'll
yeah,
show it on my screen when we
okay.
get there.
Yeah. So yeah, so automations, yeah, you can create segments and organize categories. So that's awesome. Yeah, I missed that one. All right, a couple of tweets that or threads that I thought were interesting, worth pointing out from Twitter. This one, I always am interested when blue checks are talking about Airtable. And this one I thought was interesting. So this Dan S is an editor at Verge magazine, and sounds like they use Airtable, but he thinks it's the ugliest app ever.
That's the
Reaction, Camille.
That's the first time I've heard that. I can see people not liking the way Airtable does certain things. I don't know if I could reasonably call it ugly from any perspective. That's interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah, I thought so as well for how much they're using it. So
Do they
you get
do they mean it in a literal sense? Like like the design of it is ugly, the color choice is bad, the font size, etc. When you're talking about UI design, a lot of that stuff is very important and some of it is very subjective. Or is it ugly like, oh, I have to, make 3 junction tables to get the thing that I want? That's ugly. I could agree with that, but not literally.
yeah, yeah. I like, yeah, there's some commentary better than spreadsheets. Mobile app, I think people do complain about the mobile app.
Yeah, I could see that. There's the grid view, especially in the mobile app, is,
Yeah,
I would say, strange. It doesn't function the way I would expect it to function. And calendar is a little limited.
yeah,
The mobile view of calendar.
yeah. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I it's not usually you get the opposite. Most people actually are very
Yeah.
pleased with the design of it.
Not to throw shade, but like a competitor to Airtable, I would consider is AppSheet, and I don't think AppSheet looks the best. I don't know if I would call it ugly either, but it's not a, you know, it doesn't have the friendliness, if you will, that Airtable's UI design have.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see, somebody at Crypto Village says,
Co-
"Let me tell you about Asana,"
co-
and so
yeah.
they think Airtable is worse than Asana. I actually very strongly disagree with that,
In
but
terms of UI, again, I'm keeping it strictly to like ugly. Kavan has a clarifying question: visually ugly or limited options to change how it looks? Yeah, it is limited. I will say that. You have a set number of colors that you can apply, a set number of icons that you can apply to your base, that kind of thing. The height of rows is limited into the increments that it allows you. It can't fit the content of the cell, if you will. Same thing with columns. You can't wrap column headers. These are all, I would say flaws necessarily of a UI design for Airtable. Again, I don't know if that rises to ugly.
yeah,
Just so mean.
I know. I
If you're
thought
gonna
this was
be,
funny.
if there's so many things wrong with Airtable, it's not the UI. A lot of the times, it's other stuff.
I thought this was funny. So this Whitney says, "Let me tell you about Asana," and his interpretation of that was like, "Oh, you're saying Asana is even worse than Airtable," and he's like, "If you think Asana is ugly," she's like, "No, I work at Asana." Sad you're leaving. And he's like, "Oh, my bad."
But it's
It's
kind of
funny.
funny. Twitter.
Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, most of the commentary that you'll see on Twitter is people actually being fans of the UI. Apparently, Dan S is not one of those. I'd be curious to know what he
What's a
does
good
like.
UI then for a database, a relational database software that has a better UI
Yeah,
or a prettier UI, I guess.
yeah. I have no idea. Yeah.
Right and center just right. Yeah, there's stuff that's missing. Going with Kavan's kind of point, you can't really customize Airtable's view. It's not like Bubble where you can completely design the location of every button and everything. You kind of get that with Interface Designer, but Interface Designer is also fairly limited. But is that ugly? Or is
Yeah.
it just plain? Plain, maybe.
Let's get Jen's opinion. Bring Jen in for this deep
See,
dive conversation.
all of my arguments just devolve into semantics, and that's why I'm unpleasant.
We're debating, Jen, welcome to the show.
Thanks
Glad
for
you could
having
join
me.
us. We're debating somebody on Twitter called Airtable the ugliest app ever. So
I can understand, like, when I first saw Airtable like years ago, I was like, this is like really cutesy and kind of like not what I'm looking for. But I don't think it's the ugliest app. I've seen some really ugly apps. So I think
Yeah.
they don't really see a lot of apps if they're calling Airtable ugly. But I mean, I could see where it's not everyone's cup of tea, but ugly is not a word I would use currently.
Yeah, I just feel I look at all of the recent sort of competitors to Airtable, the Four Nations from Avatar, Sea Table, Airtable. There's another one, Fire Table, different from Firebase. They all like take elements of Airtable's design and do something similar with their own pros and cons for their product. But in my opinion, a lot of the things that they've done look like it was designed 5 years ago because it might have been, and they've just now released their product. Airtable is deeply flawed in a lot of ways. I don't know if I would call it ugly.
Yeah, that's one thing I wouldn't call it. I've seen some really ugly software that just came out, to Camille's point, but also like I remember in like early 2000s working on DOS systems and doing really complicated things in black screen. So this is still like worlds away.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's a implementation issue. We'll have to have them bring their base on and see if we could improve it.
Yeah.
Throw an interface on there and call it a day.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious to know if they're using interfaces. Probably not yet. All right, moving on from that deep conversation. This one I thought was interesting. So this is Airtable. It's a tweet, but links to their blog. I've always thought that Airtable could do more at current events and like kind of being like the live dashboard for all things sports, politics, Oscars, like being like a live feed for people to collect data and kind of promoting that. So this one caught my eye that they're maybe getting more into that. I'm assuming they probably partnered with, I believe this show is on NBC, and doing more kind of like current event type stuff where you can track, so they partnered with American Song Contest, which is a show, I guess like each state has, I've seen commercial, I've never seen the show, but I believe each state has like a contestant and you vote on who's the better singer. And so Airtable's kind of like promoting that in conjunction with them. So I thought this was an interesting concept that maybe we'll see more of.
Yeah. Some of my favorite episodes from our original format of Built on Air were people who had used Airtable to log like games that they have played and the results of various contests. So it seems like a natural sort of thing for Airtable to want to do.
Yeah. So interesting article. So they use Airtable scoring system with that. So if you want to check out that blog entry and see how that's done, kind of cool there. And lastly, this one I always think is interesting when people come or go from Airtable. So they have a new VP of partners joining, Laura Padilla, and coming over from Zoom. So not sure what the VP of partners will be over, but maybe we'll get some interaction with Laura in the future. So new hires at Airtable. We know they're growing a ton. They're hiring like crazy. So thought I'd point that one out. So if you're looking to partner with Airtable, this is your contact to reach out. So that's kind of the overview of what's going on in the Airtable world. Next, we'll do a spotlight. So OnToAir is our primary sponsor. It's an all-in-one toolkit to run your business on Airtable. It's a suite of tools and apps that help you extend your Airtable utilization. And today, I want to showcase, we finally, here we are in the marketplace. We got in the marketplace finally with our two apps. So OnToAir Schemas and OnToAir Backups are now in the marketplace as of Friday. It just took an extra 6 weeks longer than I was hoping. But we're finally in. And so both of those you can utilize. You can install them into your base and use them backups for getting your data stored on a regular basis outside of Airtable. And for today, I want to showcase schemas. There's some really cool stuff in schemas if you run it inside of your Airtable. So what I want to show here is we actually put a lot of effort into making sure that schemas can handle large bases. So this base, we put a cutoff on. If your base has more than 50 tables, schemas acts a little, it visually looks a little bit different because at that size, it's tough to render everything. And so I'm actually going to delete this table. I might need to delete one more. Let me do one more.
I'm impressed by all the demo information in that base.
Yeah, we've got Hannah to thank for that.
Also, Kavan wants to know how you managed to get the actual formulas.
I don't know what you're talking about, Kavan. Okay, let me show that. I wanted to show that. So it's not doing what I was hoping it was doing. I might need to refresh. But when you have a lot of tables, we just show the table views and then you can click on them to get all the field views. And so if you click on any of the fields, it'll bring up, let me go full screen here. It will bring up this layout that gives you all the information that you need. And yes, it does give you the formula here. And Kavan, some things are just not available for public consumption. I'm sorry. Ping me offline. But yes, we do have access to the formula to track that. And so the really cool thing is once you have all this information, it also knows all the fields that are being referenced. So this formula is referencing these fields. You can easily just click on them and then it'll jump to that field. And this field, this tab also shows you all the relationships. It shows you the inbound relationships as well as the outbound relationships. And you can hyperlink between any of those fields to get a sense of how all your tables are interlinked and whatnot. You can quickly jump to any field in your entire base by searching, jumping to them. So quick interaction.
What's notes?
You can also store data and information. So this is different than if you actually put it. This is not the field description. This is notes that you want to just store within the schema app. So this information can be stored and then it will be accessible within the app. And what you'll notice is if you're using this inside of the app, inside of Airtable, it will notify you every time your schema changes. And so you'll see this will change to green and give you that notification. And now you can create a snapshot that will allow you to see the differences between what's changed. And so now you can keep a history and see. Now you can go to these snapshots, and this is the new one that I just created, and it will tell you everything that happened. So I deleted 2 tables. So this shows you that I actually deleted those tables, and you can keep track of deletions, creations, modifications. This will show you at the field level. You'll be able to within the diagram, you can click on any field level, and if you're changing it, you'll actually see that history here as it's changing. So very powerful if you're managing a base of any size and importance. I think this is a critical element that would be useful to help you stay on top of your base and keep it under control. So check it out in the marketplace. Just click on add a new app and you'll find OnTair schema and OnTair backups in the marketplace. So excited to finally have that out there.
That's awesome. I could see for even consultants either coming into a new base or a new setup or just keeping track of making sure no one's touching anything.
Yeah. Kavan says it's, a good use case for the notes field might be to store information about whether or not a field is used in a Zap or, some sort of external integration, or even with regular Airtable automations. It's just nice to, make notes for yourself that this field is needed for some process and you shouldn't, mess with its settings. She also asks if you can show and hide individual tables. I know you can filter down.
Yep. So you can, as far as that one, you can filter and create filters, and then you can save a filter and then just use that filter for whenever you want. So you can filter tables and say, I only want to see these 3 tables. Or you can get down to the, you can filter it off of field types and say, I only want to see formulas. Or you can look at the field level and every field within every company or table you can visualize. You can also visualize formulas, and it will show the relationships, the lines between any of those. By default, usually we just do linked records, but there's other relationships that you can visualize as well. We can't rearrange field orders, so I'll put that on the future improvement list. But I believe the field order is based off of the default, the created date. So that's something to consider. It will show you, this is a cool one that I like. It will show you if you have multiple views, it will show you all the views that this field is visible in and which ones it's not visible in. So I don't know if I have one that has multiple views. Here we go. So this one's visible in all of the views. here, but if it wasn't, you would see it would be grayed out for those that they're not visible in. So lots of cool stuff. Yes, Kavan, you can also export the diagram. You can generate a print layout view, and that will generate an image that you can print or copy, put in your deck or documentation or whatnot. So you can export it. You can also share it publicly and generate kind of an embedded view that could be shared outside of the app as well. So lots of functionality. That's kind of a cool print view of it. And yeah, check it out in the marketplace. Gotta move on. Next, why don't we go back to the original timeline, and we'll go with you if you want to share your screen.
Okay. Share screen. Thank you. Okay, so I put together a resource allocation example using Timeline, which the new feature in Timeline is that before you had these little summary bars at the bottom of any screen in Airtable. So in a grid view, you have like sums, averages, median, range. So it's nice when you have numeric fields, you can do some basic math equations and things like that on the numeric fields. What they did is in Timeline view, they added another tool, which is called utilization. And in order to use utilization, you have to kind of set it up the way that they expect you to. But it's pretty cool because you can see if you're doing like project management or if you're trying to track all of your resources, trucks, widgets, properties, whatever you're using that needs to be allocated to a certain person over a certain amount of time, then you can use the timeline feature. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this just so I can play with it more because it's a little fiddly. Second. I can stop. So basically what you do is you have to make sure that you have a grid with some kind of name, a start date and an end date, and then hours. So some kind of numeric allocation for a property. So here I have, pretending this is like a marketing company, and they have different projects that they're working on that have different categories, and assigning a time value to each individual record as a task. I haven't played around with it too much when you have multiple team members on a task, but I did create kind of a 1-to-1 ratio, one task, one team member. And then what you do for each team member is you have to have the number of hours, either daily or weekly, that person is available as a resource. So if this was a machine, then the machine would have an uptime of 100 hours a day, 24 hours, or 100 hours a week, 24 hours a day, things like that. But since they're people, you could say, okay, Camille's available for 20 hours. This week is available for 40 hours.
That never happens.
Sorry?
That never happens.
Yeah, so that's 5 hours or something like that, right? 20 hours is a stretch for me. And then also you could say that these, in this case, people are on vacation on certain days they're not available. So just because they're generally available during the week, if you put in for time off, like add a little time off request, you can say that these resources, these people are not available on certain days. So if you have these 3 tabs of projects, which are the individual tasks, you have team members with hours available, and then you have this, unavailable time set up, then you're able to create this fancy resource allocation timeline. And basically what this allows you to do is I have this grouped by category and then by, I had it somewhere else, but I don't want to move it because if you move stuff around, it starts to break. So you can group by however you want. So let's just say we're going to group by team member. And then we're going to group by the project that they're working on. So Ali has 4 tasks that she's working on. Dan's working on 4. I'm working on 4. And Camille's working on 4. And so this is kind of an okay view of seeing what people are doing on certain days, but it doesn't really give you a lot of information about if they're overbooked, underbooked based on the amount of time that they have available and the time that that task takes. So if you kind of click at the bottom here, you can use this utilization tool here. And allocation is the number of hours that the task is going to take. And then the resource, you're going to pick that linked record, which is the team member. And then their availability is based on the number of hours they're available. And then we said per week. And then unavailability is the time that they are off. And then you can also show by team member, because we grouped by team member, their utilization. And then you can also color code it. So if you change any of these groupings, the color coding you did does not work anymore. So it's very important to figure out what your resource allocation grouping is first before you start color coding, just because I had to redo the color coding like 6 times to show. So kind of figure, like just like anything in Airtable, you kind of want to start from like understanding what your output wants to look like. You want to know if each team member is over allocated or if a task is over allocated, a project is over allocated, figuring out how you want that information organized before you start fiddling with it and trying to make it pretty for end users, if that makes sense. So here I have the color coding down here saying that if the amount of time is under 25%, meaning the amount of time for that task, if you added all the tasks together for each person, if that's under 25%, then they're in the green. Then if they're between 25 and 50%, they're light green. Yellow is between 50 and 75. 75 to 100 is orange, and then red is anybody over 100%. So you can see that Allie is pretty well allocated across the board. And then Camille, under brand identity. So I grouped this by the category and then the person. So you can see that Camille is over allocated here. And wherever it says infinity, it means that the person is not available during that resource allocation time. So I can just drag. I can drag.
Is it a calculated field, perhaps, or is it just buggy?
It's just buggy. There's
Cool.
probably too much information on the screen, and I'm sharing my screen. So
that is true. Sometimes, yeah.
There you go.
And see, it moved, but then it still exists. So it's there. It's a time warp. But when it is at rest, you will see that she's not over allocated anymore, that you're now allocated at 62.5% as a resource. And now I have 3. Bug report.
Like bugs.
There you go. So yeah, you do your thing. Anyway, so when you see at the bottom too, if there's a resource allocation across the board of infinity, it means that some resource is allocated for a time that they're not available. So like they're not just over allocated. It's just like it's off the charts allocated because the person's not available. So it's more helps you kind of visually see for a team member how allocated they are and or resource is allocated more than it needs to be. Then you can, make the decision to move them or duplicate them or triplicate them, or allocate them more. But it allows you to kind of see and move things around. And then as you move them around, in theory, if it rests, you could see that the times have changed. So you could see here that there's no hours here because somehow when I dragged, it created new records, which is an interesting bug. I guess you can create new tasks at the same time. It's a miracle. But it helps you kind of see. And then here we have, there's something wrong with my mouse or something. You can see that we can group this by just by team member and kind of see the over allocation there. And so I think it's kind of cool. There was a time when I wanted to, I had a client who needed to see like the over allocation of a team member, especially with vacations, time off, holidays, and things like that. And the issue with Airtable is that it's not a clean way of showing that sum bar, that utility bar at the bottom doesn't, even though it kind of connects multiple records and you can do calculations across multiple records, it's not accessible data. So you can't really like use that in a report because it's just something at the bottom of Airtable. It's not an accessible piece of information. I don't think that this is an accessible piece of information, but at least it's a visual representation of what's going on, and you're not just trying to dig in the bottom to see the sum or average of the hours because you can't really calculate fields.
It is the only instance where you can color based on a summary bar.
Right. So it's cool. I think that there's obviously some bugs, but I think that overall it's a good step in the right direction for using Airtable as a project management tool. It does get clunky if you have a lot of linked records and nested dependencies. I don't know how that would work, but at least you have like a visual staffing grid of who's doing what at what time. So it's pretty cool to play with. Like I said, if you change the groupings, all of your color coding goes away. And you can customize the label. So if you have users that don't use the same terminology or use different terminology, you can kind of standardize it for the team. And then this allows you to turn off this bar down here and then just group it. So like the other screen I had, there's like 15 different calculations, whereas this is a little bit cleaner, I think, where you can see like at the resource what's going on.
Yeah.
So but again, you have to redo all of that every single time you make a change.
So do your coloring at the end.
Exactly. Figure out what you need, figure out how you want it organized, and then use the bar.
And then don't change anything.
Then you lock it.
And you lock it down. Yeah. And bases, once they're locked, they never change.
Exactly. I hadn't checked to see what it looks like on a shared view and interfaces. I just haven't gotten to yet, but I was wondering what it looked like for like another person outside.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
It doesn't look like anything.
It's forcing you to use interfaces. We like when stuff breaks. Yeah, it doesn't.
Oh my gosh.
It doesn't like that.
That's funny.
If anyone's listening.
Wow.
I have visual representation of some bugs.
That means that they never even thought of sharing a timeline view.
Yeah, and I don't think sometimes stuff loads slow when you're sharing your screen at the same time as you're doing something. That happens with a lot of stuff that I use. I don't know if I think this is separate. I think that's a bug.
I think that's we don't want you to use it in a shared view. We want you to use it in
interface.
Yeah.
Well,
that's funny.
Interesting.
Well, maybe
learning stuff in real time.
Speaking of real time, there's whispers of new features in
I was gonna
the
say.
Slack. I didn't want to say anything. I've been looking at my phone like, have you confirmed? I have no confirmation yet, so I didn't say anything.
Is that this one? We'll break. Are you done, Jen? Or
I'm good. I can pick at this all day.
Okay.
I found 5 bugs now.
Yeah, very cool. I'll put Kavan I'm assuming this is the same.
Yes.
All right. So Kavan broke this mid-show.
Well, if you're in our BuiltOnAir Slack community, a friend of the show, Scott Rose, posted it there, I believe first, based on timestamp.
Okay.
Scott was first.
All right, Scott, thank you. So automation. So the breaking news is automation's increased to 50. It was at 25.
25. And 25 steps per automation. I don't know if that has changed.
Is that
So-
for Pro too, or is that just for Enterprise?
I don't know. That's why I was waiting on confirmation because I didn't see an announcement anywhere.
Interesting. So somebody just noticed that in their automations. So breaking news, 50 automations, which makes more sense now that they have grouping, which we'll see next in our next segment. So that makes sense. Now they can handle more automations. Still 25 per automations, Kavan says.
Okay.
25 steps, that is. So very good. Let me also, we didn't do a full intro. Jen's a regular on the show, but if you want to connect with her, growwithjen.com, and she's a consultant doing cool stuff with Airtable. So we've had her on the show before where we did more of a background. So we kind of skipped that in today, but wanted to make sure everybody knew where they could find you.
Yeah, and then once this posts, I will put a link to the base so that you can copy the base to play with it some more. Just copy it into your account and play with it. So
Cool.
you can over allocate Camille and watch it break.
Yes.
Cool.
Very good. All right, Camille, we share your screen and we'll do an automate create segment.
Before we get there, Kavan pointed out that it's on the What's New page. So yay, it's there for all of the different
Nice.
plan levels. So they just did math for us. That's 1,250 actions per base. Yay. Also a new version of the Android app.
Oh, sorry.
Go.
They didn't increase the number of automation runs per month, I don't think.
No. So, that'll
Conditions are your friends.
Yeah, you'll see the limit eventually. And then the other thing that was relatively new is the automation sections. Much like view sections, you can now put things in folders, which is nice if you have 25 or maybe 50 automations in your base setup. You can collapse them and give them names. It also will tell you how many active automations are on in that group, and you can move these up or down if you so chose. Just nice little improvements to automations. So what this base is, I have a business. I have an LLC that requires me to keep track of my expenses that are business related. And much like many of my headaches, they're all made by myself. I decided I could use QuickBooks or any platform that is designed specifically for this use case. And I said, why don't I just build it in Airtable? So I built it in Airtable for no reason other than I could. So this space does a lot of different things. I have, at the end of the month, let me open up my automations again. At the end of the month, I will get an email from Airtable Automations that will say, hey, remember to go to your bank and download your transactions. They come as CSV files. So what I would do is go transactions, import CSV file, and dump in a bunch of information that will give me columns that look kind of like this one, where there's some stuff, some of it's relevant, sometimes it's not. And what I've done is I've created a couple of fields that allow me to auto categorize transactions as they come in, because I am a fairly predictable person. I buy roughly the same stuff every month, like my gas, for instance. Always provided by SoCal Gas. I have this field that tries to make the description as uniform as it can be. So there's some regex in here. It's removing any numbers because that's oftentimes variable. There's a special in case for PayPal instant transfer. For some reason, it always comes in like the weirdest possible collection of letters it could make. So I just sort of force it to always be that. But I end up with this slightly cleaned version of this description. And then I have a linked field to a table called entities. entities or the vendors that I buy things from. So in this case, SoCal Gas or Spectrum for my internet, that kind of stuff. And then if I go to my entities table, you'll see each entity is its own line item. I have a roll up that's pulling in the types of categories that the transactions for that entity has been logged in. You'll see Spectrum has only ever been logged for bills and internet because it's the only thing I buy for them. And that's useful for me because I have a default value field that's saying if only one item is in this roll up field, then the next time anything gets marked as Spectrum, log that as the category. Sometimes there's I might need to make a change. There might be multiple categories assigned to a particular entity, but it's because I bought one thing one time, and the vast majority of the time it should be under one category. So I have an override field, and this formula field will say if there's an override for that default category, use that override. Otherwise, use that. And then some of these other ones, like miscellaneous, has I think like 50 different categories it's been assigned to, so it has no default value. All that kind of stuff. And from there, I have some automations that will say, as soon as I put in let's see, all of my automations are turned on. So this is a bad idea. Don't do this, folks. If I were to log this as SoCal Gas, it should go in. Yes. So what it did was it looked at SoCal Gas, found the default category for it, and copied and pasted it into the category field here. Now, what the description uniform is useful for, and the way my automation is set up, it's called auto find entity. It's set up for when a record is created, because again, all of my stuff is coming in with a CSV. So all of the field values are filled in apart from category. So that's why I use that trigger. So I can't really demo it live, but it will find in all of my entities if this uniform description exists in the transaction name thing over here, then it will fill in SoCal Gas for me. So it's kind of a multi-step process I've set up. If the transaction is regular enough, it will have a uniform description that it can find a matching entity for. Now, the entity has been filled in, that other automation kicks in and categorizes it for me if there's a default category to be found. And that's sort of the rundown of how I collect all of my financial stuff. I don't necessarily recommend this precise system, which is why I will not be releasing it. I don't want to be responsible for your taxes if you've miscategorized something. But it is, I think, useful for having similar types of setups for the automation. So finding the automation for finding the entity, the way that's set up is when a record is created, again, all of my stuff comes in with the field values already filled in. Find records from the entities table with a condition applied where the transaction name contains the uniform description. And then I have a conditional action for if only one entity is found, then update that transaction with the link to that entity. So a very simple automation. It does use a conditional action, so it's not filling in multiple entities if more than one has found. And that other automation for filling in the default transaction category is even simpler. It only runs when the default category is not empty and when the category is empty. And then it's just copying and pasting that value into the category field. There are a couple other automations in here. I've kind of covered some of them before. The reporting ones are based on my dear, what did I call it? On a previous episode, I went over the simple time interval based reporting. I use that in this base so that I can say what were the total transactions for March of 2022, what were the total transactions for 2022 as a whole, Q1 2022. All of those are different types of reports I would want to pull. These automations are copying basically a formatted transaction date into report line items and then into a report. We kind of covered that on a previous episode, so I won't go too into that. And these are just emailing me when I forget to log information.
Very cool. What happens if you go back to the automation, the auto find entity?
Yeah.
If it, so I think that's interesting use of the conditional logic. If it didn't find any record, if you didn't have that conditional action and you just tried to create what was found, so it has a potential of finding 0, what would happen if you tried to update?
If it finds 0, what it might do, it might clear this value out for the entity. It shouldn't come in with an entity anyway, but for everyone's reference, this update record step, if this were up here and 0 records were found, this list of record ID would be a null value. And that would mean change this field into a null value, thus clearing out the field. In my instance, it's already null and it's changing to null, so nothing would happen.
Gotcha.
Or nothing should happen. I haven't actually tested that. But yeah.
A question from Kavan.
Yes.
You had a system that linked all default categories that were found and then have the automation copy over the actual category to the single select when there is exactly one linked record.
That is what happens,
Yeah.
I think. So this is the default category lookup field that's pulling from SoCal Gas, and what that automation did was just go boop, boop. And it will only do that when there is one. This is a single select field, so it can only copy one value over.
Right. Awesome. Very useful. Great use of automations. Just a fun way to manage your life when you got nothing else to worry about.
Yeah, I got bored. I don't recommend doing this. Just use another system if you super need precision and you're if this is something you genuinely need. I would recommend using a system that is designed to do it. My system works perfectly fine. I used it for my taxes last year and I haven't been audited yet, so that's nice. But
100% audit proof system.
Yeah, completely endorsed. Don't sue me.
I would do that kind of stuff with my credit card expenses because I have a spreadsheet. Don't tell anyone. I was an accountant to keep up to date because I didn't want to do my wave accounting every month because I'm lazy. And then we bought a house last year, so they're like, "We need your profit and loss." I'm like, "Crap! I have to actually start doing my wave accounting because my spreadsheet. I did it at the end of the year, but they wanted it in September, and I was like, crap." So yeah, I got machined out of doing that. The hard way.
I'm probably in the same category.
Only when you have to.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. We'll just end. We're up on time here, so we'll save our final segment for a future show. But just want to give a plug for the BuiltOnAir community. Find amazing people like those on the show and those in the community watching and sharing all their great insight. Please join us, builtonair.com/join. Make sure you check the box to join the Slack community so you can get in there. Feel free to ask questions, contribute, help others, and lots of fun stuff going on in there. So join us at builtonair.com. And we're grateful that you came with us this week, and we hope to see you next week. Until then, we love to see what you've built on air.